Ray jumped up in his seat, and then we seen him get shot in the side of the head, and he fell back in the seat, and Governor Conley was holding his stomach.
Nobody moved. Everyone seemed stunned. A few seemed to look around, wondering who has the firecrackers. Then
the gentleman just walked in our studio that I am meeting for the first time, as well as you. This is WFAA-TV in Dallas, Texas. May I have your name, please, sir?
My name is Abraham Zapruder.
Mr. Zapruder?
Zapruder, yes, sir.
Zapruder. And would you tell us your story, please, sir?
I got out and about a half hour earlier and get into a good spot to shoot some pictures. As the president was making his turn, I had a shot. And he slumped to the side like this. Then I had another shot or two. I couldn't say what it was, one or two. And I saw his head practically open up, all blood and everything. And I kept on shooting. That's about all. I'm just sick. I can't.
I think that pretty well expresses the entire feelings of the whole world.
Within 2 hours, the police had arrested a suspect. 24-year-old Lee Harvey Oswald was a Marxist, an active supporter of Fidel Castro, who had once defected to the Soviet Union.
The original complaint that the police department filed on Lee Oswald around midnight on the 22nd of November said that Lee Oswald did, in furtherance of an international communist conspiracy, assassinate President John F. Kennedy.
The White House feared that Oswald's communist connections might spark an international crisis. So Lyndon Johnson demanded that the charge of conspiracy be dropped. Johnson persuaded the Chief Justice to chair a commission of inquiry. 9 months later, the Warren Commission concluded there had been no conspiracy. But in 1979, the House Assassinations Committee concluded there probably had been a plot to kill the president. Meanwhile, conspiracy theories have multiplied, as Hollywood movies and 2,000 books have accused the CIA, the FBI, the Pentagon, Fidel Castro, anti-Castro Cubans, the KGB, the Mafia, right-wing oilmen, and even Lyndon Johnson himself of assassinating John Kennedy.
Increasingly in the last 30 years, Oswald has become a footnote to the story. He is lost under a deluge of details about trajectory angles and ballistics and forensics and possible plotters. We have no understanding in this sterile presentation of him, of his real character and what motivates him.
I'm just a patsy.
Lone gunman, conspirator, or patsy, Lee Harvey Oswald remains the central mystery at the heart of the Kennedy assassination.
Any effort to explain what happened in Dallas must explain Lee Harvey Oswald. And Lee Harvey Oswald is a mystery wrapped up in an enigma, hidden behind a riddle. He is not, I put it in simple words, an easy man to explain.
And easy explanations died 30 years ago when Oswald, in his turn, fell to an assassin's bullet.
Shot. Who Oswald has been shot? Yeah, he is shot. Oswald. It is Oswald. You're all.
The Bronx Zoo was a haven for Lee Oswald. He seemed to prefer the company of animals to people. He had not set foot in school for nearly 2 months when he was picked up for truancy at the zoo. He was taken to juvenile court and became case number 23979.
I remember him vividly. He was a skinny, unprepossessing kid. He was not a mentally disturbed kid. As a matter of fact, his IQ was better than average. He was just emotionally frozen. He was a kid who had never developed a really trusting relationship with anybody.
Lee was a truant, but not a delinquent. He spent endless hours roaming the New York subway system alone. He haunted public libraries and museums.
From what I could garner, he really interacted with no one. He made his own meals. His mother left at around 7 and came home at 7, and he shifted for himself. You got the feeling of a kid, nobody gave a darn about him. He was just floating along in the world with no emotional resources at all.
He was born in New Orleans in 1939, but never knew his father.
You go back to the death of his dad 2 months before he was born, that's a tremendous impact. What Lee missed from his childhood in comparison to me was the whole family being together all the time, the continuity there. The lack of stability, I think, entered into that to a large degree. I don't know at what age Mother verbalized to Lee the effect that she felt he was a burden to her. But certainly by age 3, he had the sense that, you know, we were a burden.
Lee's mother, Marguerite, had also grown up without a parent.
She had certain characteristics that were so much like Lee. The time and circumstances always seemed to be against her. The world owed her a living. She wanted to be somebody. I think this was passed on to Lee.
When he was 13, Lee and his mother moved into a small apartment in the Bronx. His boyhood had taught him that life was unfair. He sought solace in socialism.
I was looking for a key to my environment, and then I discovered socialist literature. I had to dig for my books in the back dusty shelves of libraries.
When the truant officer came again, Lee's mother decided to flee New York. Lee and Marguerite returned to New Orleans. They moved into a bad neighborhood on the edge of the French Quarter. Lee's interest in socialism seems to have diverted him from the vices of the area.
Dear sirs, I am 16 years of age and would like more information about your youth league. I would like to know if there is a branch in my area. I am a Marxist and have been studying social principles for well over 15 months. I am very interested in your YPSL. Sincerely, Lee Oswald.
Despite his Marxist beliefs, he became a cadet in the Civil Air Patrol. He was keen to follow his older brothers into the armed forces. It was the first in a lifetime of contradictory acts. In 1957, Lee became a U.S. Marine. He was just 17. He received extensive training in marksmanship. Some have claimed that he was a poor shot, but the record shows he was more than competent.
He shoots on a rifle range 212, which means he qualifies for the second highest position in the Marine Corps, that of a sharpshooter. Near the end of his stay in the Marines in 1959, he went back to requalify himself in the range, still shot 191, and still qualified as a marksman. That meant that he could hit a target 8 times out of 10 from 200 yards away.
He was smart enough to be trained as a radar controller. He was posted to a base in Japan, where he had access to classified material.
Oswald enters the Marines with such high hopes, but it quickly unravels for him. Just a year after entering, he wounds himself with a pistol that he's not supposed to have. And as a result, he's court-martialed. And then he's put on KP duty for a very long stint. He's very dissatisfied with it. Eventually, He attacks the sergeant that he believes is responsible for his long KP service in a bar and challenges him to a fight. Then he's court-martialed a second time. This time he's put into the brig. And this has an effect on him. The brig is very hard, and when he comes out, he's now an embittered person.
If you complained about, oh, we've got to go on a march this morning, or we've got to do this morning, scrub barracks, or whatever we had to do, if you were complaining about it, he would say that that was the capitalist form of government making us do these things. Karl Marx and his form of government would alleviate that.
He made no secret of his Marxist beliefs. He was nicknamed Oswaldovich by his fellow Marines.
Sir, down on deck is 45 United States Marine Corps and 16
Lee Oswald asked for an early discharge from the Marines. The day it was approved, he applied for a passport. In September 1959, Lee Oswald arrived in Russia. He'd planned his trip in secret, and some have wondered if it was financed by Soviet intelligence. A disaffected Marxist with access to military secrets, Oswald certainly fitted the common profile of a Cold War traitor. It is still not clear how Lee Oswald, with only $200 in his bank account, could travel to Moscow as a deluxe-class tourist with his own car, driver, and personal in-tourist guide.
I took him for an excursion around the city. We went to the most important sites of Moscow, such as Tretyakov Art Gallery, the cathedrals, and the treasury of the Moscow Kremlin.
But Oswald seemed uninterested in the sights. On their second day, he told Rima the real reason for his trip. He had come to Moscow to defect.
I was shocked. I asked his motives, his reasons, and he said that it was his political views. He said that he was a communist.
Rima took his request to the Soviet authorities. Oswald later recorded the official response in what he called his historic diary.
I must leave country tonight at 8 p.m. as visa expires. I am shocked. My dreams. I retire to my room.
That same afternoon, we were to meet downstairs as usual. Some time passed, but he didn't appear. Certainly, I was nervous and wanted to know what had happened. So that's why I rushed upstairs. I knocked at the door, but there was no answer. We all tumbled in the room, and behind the shoulders of the two men, I saw Lee in the bath. So it was water there, and it was reddish, so it was blood. Lee cut his wrist.
Oswald was rushed unconscious to hospital. A week later, he was about to be discharged when his doctor got a call from the KGB, telling her to hold Oswald until they arrived.
Sometime later, about 40 minutes, a large black car arrived and 3 young men came in. They confiscated his medical history, his discharge paper, and all his documents. And then they told me they were taking him away.
What happened next is unknown. For 30 years, the KGB has maintained that it never interrogated Oswald. The former head of the KGB who handled Oswald's case is Vladimir Semichastny. It is only now that men like Semichastny can tell the KGB's version of events.
Counterintelligence and intelligence, they both looked him over to see what he was capable of. But unfortunately, neither could find any ability at all.
The KGB moved Oswald to a hotel while they considered his fate. After 3 days, Lee could bear the waiting no longer.
It seems like 3 years. I must have some sort of a showdown.
He marched into the U.S. Embassy and demanded to see the consul.
They put a piece of paper on my desk. It said, I have come to revoke my American citizenship. I have applied for Soviet citizenship. He also volunteered the information that he'd been, while in the Marines, he'd been a radar technician. And that when he became a Soviet citizen, he intended to offer to the Soviet authorities everything that he had learned.
Until now, the KGB has always maintained that it never questioned Oswald about his military service.
There were conversations, but this was such outdated information. The kind we say the sparrows have already chirped to the entire world. And now Oswald tells us about it. Not the kind of information that would interest such a high-level organization like ours.
By now, word of Oswald's suicide attempt had reached the Kremlin. Ekaterina Futseva, the highest-ranking woman in the Politburo, was furious when she read that an idealistic young socialist was being turned away. She used her influence with Nikita Khrushchev to force the KGB to change its tune.
If he's begging, to hell with him. Let him stay here in order to avoid an international scandal on account of such a nobody. We were not convinced this would be his last act of blackmail. We expected he would try again, which would be difficult to deal with in Moscow. So we decided to send him to Minsk.
In January 1960, Lee Oswald arrived in Minsk. He was found a job in a TV factory and given a choice apartment to himself, a luxury unheard of for a young bachelor. Naturally, the KGB planted a bug in the ceiling. An American in Minsk was a rarity, and Lee Oswald was befriended by a small group of college students, anxious to improve their English.
The door of Henry's lunch counter opened and 2 men came in.
One of them taped Oswald's voice to study his southern accent.
I gave him rather chance pieces to read, and those happened to be, well, Shakespeare, from Othello, Ernest Hemingway.
The 2 men at the counter read the menu. From the other end of the counter, Nick Adams watched.
They also improvised dialogues, in which Titovets would interview Oswald. In one of these sessions, Lee Oswald adopted the role of a mass murderer.
Well, okay. Will you tell us about your last killing?
Well, there was a young girl under a bridge. She came in carrying a loaf of bread, and I just cut her throat from ear to ear.
What for?
Well, I wanted the loaf of bread, of course.
What do you take to be the most famous killing in your life?
Well, the time I killed 8 men on the Bowery, the sidewalk there, they were just standing there loafing around. I didn't like their faces, so I just shot them all with a machine gun. It was very, very famous. All the newspapers carried the story.
So we're just having a great time, and actually we're laughing our heads off.
In Minsk, Oswald had the chance to do what he had always wanted to do, live in a socialist society. But the KGB was suspicious. It wanted to know if the young American was a false defector who was really working for U.S. intelligence. At the Minsk television factory, Oswald's new friends and workmates were forced to inform on him.
I was met by one of their people, and it was like this. He said, your country asks you, your country demands. There is a foreigner here. It's in the country's interest for security. and so on. That was early on, but I told him about it a year later. I had 3 or 4 meetings with the KGB people. They gave me little assignments to provoke him, saying, try this out on him and see what he says.
The work is drab. The money I get has nowhere to be spent. As my Russian improves, I become increasingly conscious of just what sort of a society I live in.
After a year, Lee Oswald wanted to go home. Then, one night at a dance in the Palace of Culture, he was introduced to Marina Prusakova.
She was a very attractive lady. She dressed well. We went up to her with Lee Harvey Oswald, and he said straight away that he would like to get to know her. We were standing right here, beside that column. Of course, he fell in love with her straight away, at first sight, as we say in Russia.
Marina Oswald declined to be interviewed for this program, but she talked at length to writer Priscilla Macmillan. Macmillan befriended Marina after the assassination and wrote an intimate portrait of her life with Lee.
Marina liked Lee for several reasons. One was that he was polite. She liked his being foreign. She thought that an American would treat her better than a Russian. And he asked her to be his fiancée.
6 weeks after they met, a hasty wedding party was arranged, and Lee and Marina began married life together. From the outset, it was never an ideal marriage. One of the few things they agreed on was that they and their baby daughter June should go and live in the United States. Through its bug in the ceiling, the KGB listened in to the increasingly furious rows between the young couple. But 2.5 years of continuous surveillance had revealed nothing.
We concluded that he was not working for American intelligence. His intellectual training, experience, and capabilities were
about the shadows being inappropriate. Our photographic panel indicated in great detail that these shadows were not inappropriate, that the critics had simply not understood optics accordingly.
Oswald gave a copy of the photograph to a friend. On the back, someone wrote in Russian, "Hunter of fascists, ha ha ha." Oswald's own signature is on the bottom. On April the 1st, Lee was fired from his job. Marina says he spent a few evenings at target practice. On the night of April the 12th, she says he didn't come home at all.
At about 10, he still hadn't come home. She was worried. She walked into a room, his study, which he told her never to enter. And there, on his desk, she saw a sheet of paper with a key lying on top of it.
Lee had left a note for Marina, written in Russian.
Here is the key to the post office box. You can throw out my clothing, but as for my personal papers, I prefer you keep them. I left you as much money as I could.
That evening, someone fired a single shot through the window of General Walker's study.
Looking the situation over, back there 40 steps behind me.
Miraculously, General Walker survived to tell his story.
A bullet crashed through the window and just missed me. And it felt much grit and dirt in my hair. And my arm was laying on the desk, and it was bleeding in 3 places, which turned out to be fragments from the shell casing.
The radio broadcast that a boy on the spot had seen 1 or 2 cars in the alleyway behind Walker's house. Lee laughed. He exploded in laughter. And he said, "Americans are so spoiled. They think you always have to have a car, whereas I got away on my own 2 feet." Lee explained to Marina that he had jumped on a bus, buried the rifle, and then he'd taken another bus. And he said when he took the bus, there they lose the scent.
Until the assassination of John Kennedy, the Walker shooting remained unsolved. 2 weeks later, Oswald abruptly left Dallas. In April 1963, Lee Harvey Oswald returned to New Orleans. He was about to enter the most mysterious chapter of his short life. The city to which he returned was seething with intrigue and paranoia. New Orleans had welcomed thousands of Cuban exiles who had fled Castro's communism. These were the people whom Castro called gusanos, the worms. As in Miami, they were fervently anti-communist. In the swamps and bayous, then as now, violent paramilitary groups prepared to overthrow Castro.
I can assure you that this flag will be returned to this brigade in a free Havana.
But after the Bay of Pigs fiasco and the Cuban Missile Crisis, Kennedy's support began to wane. The hard men and the paramilitary groups felt betrayed. In New Orleans, the Cuban enclaves burned with a murderous hatred for the president. In the spring of 1963, nothing could have been more provocative than Oswald's open espousal of Castro's cause.
No, sir, I'm not a communist, and I think that the...
Oswald defended Castro on local radio and gave a television interview about his own Marxist beliefs.
And are you a Marxist? Well, I have studied Marxist philosophy, yes, sir, and also other philosophers.
But are you a Marxist? I think you did admit that you consider yourself a Marxist.
Well, I would very definitely say that I am a Marxist. That is correct. But that does not mean, however, that I'm a communist.
It all began in May 1963 when Oswald printed some pro-Castro leaflets. He pretended he was part of the Fair Play for Cuba committee, but there were no other members in New Orleans.
We have had members in this area for several months now. We have decided to feel out the public what they think of our organization, our aims. And for that purpose, we have been distributing literature on the street.
Oswald's pro-Castro activities seemed genuine enough, but then he appears to have changed sides. In August, he approached the leader of an anti-Castro group called Carlos Bringuer.
When Oswald came to my store for the first time, he was explaining how he was against Castro, and he was asking in what way he could help us to fight against Castro. He was telling me that he had been in the Marine Corps, that he had experience in guerrilla warfare, and that he can help us in the guerrilla fight against Castro. The second time that Oswald came to my store was when he brought this guidebook from Marines. He said that this was a present for me to see if this could help me out to fight Castro.
The manual showed how to make bombs, booby traps,